"Allison, we have a situation," my father said over the phone, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "I am not walking you down the aisle on Sunday. Your sister is crying in the bathroom, and your wedding is triggering her insecurities." I froze, staring at my fiancée across the table. "Cancel the ballroom," my mother chimed in from the background, sounding furious. "Move the reception to your uncle's backyard so you don't overshadow Brittany. If you don't, we will wear funeral black, sit in the back row, and watch you walk down that aisle completely alone." My name is Allison. I am a director at a luxury public relations firm, and to understand why my father's threat didn't break me, and why the man who eventually took his place at my side made my parents stand up in pure terror. You need to know something first. In my family, my sister's tears were never just tears. They were weapons. It was exactly 5 days before my wedding. My fiancé, David, and I were sitting at the kitchen island of our downtown condo. Spread out in front of us was a meticulously organized wedding binder, a massive architectural seating chart, and a stack of vendor contracts. David was 35, a brilliant, fiercely analytical corporate tax attorney. I was 33, having spent the last decade building a reputation for managing high-stakes media crises for wealthy clients. We had planned a $150,000 luxury wedding at one of the most exclusive hotel ballrooms in the city. There was going to be a string quartet, a custom silk gown, a 5-course plated dinner, and 200 guests. We had paid for every single cent of it in cash. We had no debt. We had asked my parents for absolutely nothing. But independence in my family was viewed as an act of treason. Growing up, the dynamic in my household was set in stone. I was the scapegoat, and my younger sister Brittany was the golden child. Brittany was currently 30 years old, an aspiring social media influencer whose entire brand was built on playing the victim. If she failed a class, my parents blamed the teacher. If she lost a job, my parents blamed the economy. My role, since I was a teenager, was to make myself small so Brittany could feel large. If I won an academic award, my mother, Patricia, would hide the trophy so it wouldn't hurt Brittany's feelings. When I bought my first car, my father, Richard, criticized the model because Brittany was still taking the bus. I was constantly told that I was cold, selfish, and lacked empathy. Brittany, on the other hand, was sensitive. So, when my phone rang at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday night, 5 days before the biggest moment of my life, and I saw my father's name on the caller ID, I put it on speakerphone, expecting a last-minute complaint about the hotel accommodations. Instead, I got an ultimatum designed to humiliate me. "I'm sorry, Dad," I said slowly, trying to process the sheer absurdity of his statement. "You are refusing to walk me down the aisle? Because Brittany is crying in a bathroom? Don't use that tone with me, Allison," Richard snapped. "You know how fragile your sister is. Her husband, Jamal, has been working long hours, and she's feeling very isolated. And now you're throwing this obscenely flashy, over-the-top wedding right in her face. It's insensitive. It's triggering her insecurities about her own marriage." I looked at David, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "When Brittany got married 3 years ago, I paid for her bachelorette party. I stayed up until 4 in the morning addressing her invitations by hand because she said she was too overwhelmed. I smiled in all the photos. I didn't make her wedding about me, because it wasn't about you," my mother, Patricia, yelled, having clearly grabbed the phone from my father. "You are always so selfish, Allison. You just have to be the center of attention, don't you? You're acting like a total bridezilla. Your sister's mental health is spiraling, and you only care about your stupid ballroom." "It is my wedding day, Mom," I said, my voice hardening. "It is actually the one day in my life that is supposed to be about me. Family is supposed to support each other," Patricia cried out, deploying her favorite guilt trip tactic. "If you actually cared about this family, you would downgrade this circus. Cancel the hotel. Uncle Carl said, you can use his backyard. We can get a barbecue caterer. It will be intimate, and Brittany won't feel so overshadowed by your constant need to show off." I stared at the phone in absolute disbelief. They wanted me to throw away $150,000 in non-refundable deposits, cancel a luxury ballroom, and move a black tie wedding for 200 people to a muddy suburban backyard, simply because my 30-year-old sister was throwing a tantrum. I am not cancelling my venue, I stated firmly. The contracts are signed. The vendors are paid. Fine. Richard's voice returned to the line, cold and venomous. If you insist on being a selfish brat, then actions have consequences. I am withdrawing from the bridal procession. Your mother and I will not be walking you in. We will wear funeral black. We will sit in the very back row with Brittany. And we will watch you walk down that aisle completely alone, so everyone can see exactly what kind of daughter you really are. He didn't wait for a response. He hung up. The dial tone echoed through our quiet condo. For a normal bride, this would have been the moment of collapse. This would have been the moment of tears, of panic, of calling them back and begging for forgiveness just to keep the peace. But I didn't cry. I had spent my entire career managing public relations crises for billionaires, politicians, and corporations. I knew how to emotionally detach. I knew how to look at a disaster and see the underlying mechanics of a hostile takeover. I picked up my red pen, reached across the kitchen island, and drew a thick, dark line through Richard, Patricia, and Brittany's names on the head table seating chart. David watched me in silence for a moment. Then he crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair. "Allison," David said softly, his analytical mind already spinning. "Something about that phone call doesn't make sense." "Which part?" I asked, looking up from the chart. "The part where my sister is having a manufactured meltdown, or the part where my parents are enabling it to punish me?" "No, that part is perfectly consistent with their psychological profile," David replied, tapping his finger against his chin. "What doesn't make sense is the demand." I frowned. "What do you mean?" David stood up and began pacing the length of the kitchen. "Think about your father's core motivation," David explained, slipping effortlessly into the mindset of a corporate interrogator. "Richard owns an import-export business. He is obsessed with country club status. He is obsessed with the appearance of wealth. He leases cars he can't afford just so the neighbors can see the hood ornament." "Right?" "Right," I agreed. "So, why would a man who is obsessed with luxury optics want to cancel a $150,000 wedding?" David asked, turning to face me. "This wedding is the ultimate status symbol. He gets to put on a tuxedo, drink top-shelf scotch, rub shoulders with my law partners, and take credit for raising a successful daughter. The Richard you've described to me would crawl over broken glass to be seen at the head table of that ballroom." A cold realization began to creep down the back of my neck. David was right. My father's vanity always superseded Brittany's tantrums. He would usually buy Brittany a shiny new gift to shut her up so he could enjoy his own spotlight. "He wanted you to move it to a backyard," David continued, his eyes narrowing. "A private, unglamorous backyard where none of the high-profile guests would show up. He threatened to sit in the back row. He is trying to create physical distance." "Distance from what?" I asked. "Not what," David corrected. "Who? He's not afraid of you outshining Brittany, Allison. He is terrified of being in that ballroom. He is terrified of someone on our guest list." I pulled the master guest list toward me. There were 200 names. Colleagues from my PR firm, David's partners from the corporate tax law firm, old friends from college, extended family members, and then my eyes landed on table 4. Jamal. Jamal was Brittany's husband. He was in his mid-30s, an incredibly intelligent, self-made venture capitalist who had built a massive fortune through aggressive tech investments. Unlike my family, Jamal was quiet, dignified, and entirely unaffected by the superficial status games my father loved to play. He and Brittany had always seemed like an odd match, but Jamal was incredibly loyal, and he had provided Brittany with a lifestyle that my parents could brag about. As I stared at Jamal's name on the list, my cell phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text message. Not from Brittany, not from my mother, from Jamal. "Allison, we need to meet. Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m., the coffee shop near your office. Do not tell your parents and do not tell Brittany." Just as I stared at the glowing screen, my heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. My father hadn't cancelled his walk down the aisle because of a bathroom tantrum. He had cancelled it because the massive hidden bomb was sitting right in the middle of my guest list, and he knew that if the wedding went forward as planned, the detonation would be inescapable. The wedding sabotage was not about Brittany's feelings. It was about a secret my father needed buried before Sunday. At exactly 7 o'clock the next morning, I walked into a small, discreet, dimly lit coffee shop located 3 blocks away from my PR firm. Jamal was already sitting in a corner booth, nursing a black coffee. He was wearing a dark, tailored suit, his posture rigid. Despite his immense wealth, Jamal never dressed for attention. He dressed for authority. I slid into the booth across from him. I didn't order anything. "Jamal," I said softly, deciding to cut straight to the chase. "If you asked me here to try and negotiate a peace treaty on behalf of my sister, you are wasting your time. She has been playing the victim her entire life, and I am not downgrading my wedding to accommodate her manufactured anxiety." Jamal looked at me over the rim of his coffee cup. His dark eyes were cold, calculating, and entirely exhausted. "I didn't ask you here to defend Brittany," Jamal said, setting his cup down. "I haven't slept in 2 days, Allison. I asked you here because I need you to tell me the truth. Are you and David facing financial ruin?" I blinked, completely thrown off guard. The question was so utterly disconnected from reality that I actually let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Financial ruin?" I repeated. "Jamal, David is a senior partner at a corporate tax firm, and I am a director at one of the top PR agencies in the state. We are doing exceptionally well." Jamal didn't smile. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, lowering his voice. "3 days ago," Jamal said quietly, "your father, your mother, and Brittany came to my office. They sat on the sofa in my suite, and they all looked like they had been crying. Richard told me that you and David had vastly overextended yourselves trying to pay for this luxury wedding. He said you had taken out predatory loans, that you were defaulting on the vendor contracts, and that the hotel was threatening not only to cancel the event but to sue you for breach of contract." My blood ran completely cold. The breath caught in my throat. "He said you were too proud to ask for help," Jamal continued, his voice tight with suppressed anger. "He said you were on the verge of a total, humiliating bankruptcy. He begged me, literally begged me, Allison, to provide an emergency bridge loan to cover the debts. He said he would pay me back over the next 2 years, but that he needed the capital immediately to save you from absolute disgrace." I stared at Jamal. The sheer scale of the lie was paralyzing. "Jamal," I whispered, my voice shaking slightly, "David and I paid for the entire wedding in cash. There are no loans. There are no debts. The hotel is paid in full." Jamal closed his eyes. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "I need you to prove that to me, Allison," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "Right now, please." I didn't hesitate. I pulled my phone out of my purse, opened my primary banking application, and pushed the phone across the table. The screen clearly displayed a massive, incredibly healthy balance in my checking account, alongside a zero balance on my credit cards. Then, I opened a shared spreadsheet David and I had created. It listed every single wedding vendor: the florist, the caterer, the string quartet, the venue, with a bright green paid in full next to every single line item. Jamal stared at the screen for a long, agonizing minute. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes were completely empty. The quiet, loyal brother-in-law was gone. I was looking at the ruthless venture capitalist who had built an empire by destroying people who crossed him. "I wired him $300,000, Jamal said. The number hit me like a physical blow. "300,000? I gasped. "Jamal, why would you give him that much money without verifying it with me first?" "Because it wasn't just him," Jamal said, his voice laced with absolute venom. "It was Patricia, and it was Brittany. My wife sat in my office, held my hand, cried tears down her face, and told me how worried she was about her big sister. She used my loyalty to her family against me. They knew I would never let my wife's sister suffer a public humiliation if I had the power to stop it." The pieces of the puzzle violently snapped together in my mind. The phone call from my father the night before suddenly made perfect, horrifying sense. "He wasn't trying to cancel the ballroom because Brittany was jealous," I said, the realization washing over me like ice water. He was trying to cancel it because if we actually held a $150,000 wedding, you would be there. Jamal nodded slowly. And if I was there, sitting at table 4, drinking champagne and looking at the opulent floral arrangements, I would eventually walk over to David and casually mention how glad I was that the bridge loan helped smooth things over, and David would have looked at me like I was insane. The lie would have exploded in real time. My parents didn't want to hide my wedding in Uncle Carl's backyard because they hated my success. They wanted to hide it there so they could maintain the illusion that I was broke, allowing them to pocket a $300,000 windfall from my brother-in-law. "We need to go see David," I said, grabbing my purse and standing up. "Right now." 20 minutes later, Jamal and I walked into the sleek, glass-paneled offices of David's corporate tax law firm. We bypassed the receptionist and walked directly into David's corner office. David looked up from his dual monitors, surprised to see Jamal. But the moment he saw the look on my face, he immediately closed his laptop and stood up. "What happened?" David asked. I didn't speak. I simply pointed to Jamal. Jamal sat down in one of the leather guest chairs and recounted the entire story. He detailed the fake bankruptcy narrative, the tears from Brittany, and the massive wire transfer. David listened in absolute silence. As a corporate tax attorney, he spent his entire life untangling complex financial fraud. When Jamal finished speaking, David didn't express shock or outrage. He simply walked over to his desk, pulled a yellow legal pad toward him, and picked up a pen. "Jamal, do you have the routing and account numbers for the wire transfer on your phone?" David asked calmly. "Yes," Jamal said, pulling up his bank application. He read the numbers aloud. David jotted them down. He frowned, staring at the sequence of digits. "This isn't Richard's personal checking account," David noted, his eyes narrowing. "And it isn't the primary operating account for his import-export business. I've seen his corporate letterhead. The routing number belongs to a commercial holding account based in Delaware. I asked him why he wanted it wired there." Jamal said, his jaw tight. "He claimed it was a tax optimization strategy to prevent the sudden influx of cash from triggering an IRS audit on your personal accounts." David let out a dry, humorless laugh. "That's absurd. A direct gift to a family member to cover wedding expenses isn't taxable income to the recipient." He used legal buzzwords to mask a diversion of funds. David sat down at his computer. As a senior partner, he had access to a suite of highly advanced, incredibly expensive financial databases and corporate registry tracking systems used for forensic accounting. "Jamal," David asked without looking away from the screen, "you invested in Richard's import-export business a few years ago, didn't you?" "Yes," Jamal replied. $2 million. Seed capital for a major logistics expansion he was pitching. As a major investor, you have the legal right to request an audit of the corporate books, correct?" David asked. "Yes. It's written into my operating agreement," Jamal confirmed. "But I never exercised it. He was my father-in-law. I trusted him." "We are exercising it right now," David said. "Give me your login credentials for the investor portal. I want to see his quarterly filings." For the next 2 hours, Jamal and I sat in silence as David worked. His fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up spreadsheets, cross-referencing state registries, and tracing the digital footprints of Richard's corporate entities. The deeper David dug, the darker the room felt. At 11 a.m., David finally stopped typing. He leaned back in his chair, took his glasses off, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "It's not just the 300,000, David said quietly. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "What do you mean?" David turned one of his monitors so Jamal and I could see the screen. It was filled with a complex flowchart connecting various LLCs, bank accounts, and corporate entities. "Richard's import-export business is completely hollowed out," David explained, pointing to the center of the chart. "For the last 2 years, he has been systematically siphoning money out of the primary operating account. He created a series of fake vendor invoices, billing his own company for shipping and logistics services that were never actually rendered. He then paid those fake invoices using your $2 million investment." Jamal stared at the screen, his face turning an ashen gray. Where did the money go? Offshore shell entities, mostly, David said. But the 300,000 he stole from you this week didn't go offshore. It was routed into a domestic trust, and the primary beneficiary of that trust isn't Richard. David clicked a button, bringing up a separate document. It's Brittany, David said. Silence fell over the office. It was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning unit. Why does Brittany need $300,000? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. David pulled up a final set of records. He had run a background financial check on Brittany's name, something he could do legally as part of uncovering the fraud network tied to the trust. She has a gambling addiction, David stated bluntly, and an extreme luxury spending problem. She has massive debts tied to 3 different casinos, along with several high-end luxury boutiques. Jamal, she has been maxing out credit cards in her own name, hiding the statements from you, and using her father's embezzled funds to pay the minimum balances to keep the accounts active. But she finally hit a wall. She was about to be sued by 2 different creditors, which would have exposed the debt to you. They needed a massive, immediate injection of cash to wipe the slate clean before you found out. Jamal closed his eyes. The betrayal was so absolute, so structurally profound, that it defied comprehension. His entire marriage was a financial facade. His wife didn't love him. She viewed him as a personal ATM. His father-in-law didn't respect him. He viewed him as a mark to be bled dry. They had used my name, my reputation, and my wedding as the ultimate invoice to steal from him. Jamal stood up abruptly. The sheer, terrifying aura of a man who was about to destroy a company radiated from him. I am going to Richard's office, Jamal said, his voice deadly calm. And then I am going home and I am packing my wife's bags? No, David said sharply, standing up to block Jamal's path. Jamal, stop. Listen to me. Jamal glared at David, his fists clenched at his sides. They stole from me, David. They used my wife to lie to my face, and if you confront them right now, you will lose everything. David countered, speaking with the cold, absolute authority of a lawyer who destroys people for a living. Richard is committing federal wire fraud. He is committing tax evasion. He is breaching his fiduciary duty to you as an investor. If you walk into his office and punch him in the mouth, or if you scream at Brittany and kick her out, you trigger their defense mechanisms. David stepped closer to Jamal. Richard will immediately transfer the remaining funds offshore. He will destroy the hard drives containing the fake vendor invoices. Brittany will run to a divorce attorney, file an emergency injunction claiming you are abusive, and try to freeze your personal assets before you can untangle them from hers. You cannot react emotionally. You have to handle this like a corporate execution. Jamal's breathing slowed. The violent impulse receded, replaced by the cold, calculating logic of a venture capitalist. What do you suggest, counselor? Jamal asked. David looked at me. I stood up from my chair, my mind already operating in crisis management mode. My father threatened to sit in the back row of my wedding and watch me walk down the aisle alone, I said, my voice steady, completely devoid of the daughterly affection they had weaponized against me. He wanted me to cancel the ballroom. He wanted me hidden in a backyard, terrified of the humiliation he was threatening to inflict on me. I walked over to the desk and looked at the flowchart of their crimes. They built this entire lie on the assumption that I am a scapegoat who will suffer in silence to keep the family peace. I continued. So, we give them exactly what they asked for. I won't cancel the venue. I won't tell them we know. We let them dress in black. We let them show up to the hotel on Sunday. Jamal looked at me, a slow, dangerous understanding dawning in his eyes. If we confront them now, they run, I said. But if we wait until Sunday at 3 p.m., they will voluntarily walk into a room with 200 witnesses, locking themselves in a ballroom they are desperate to avoid. And while they are sitting there, waiting to humiliate me, I will freeze her accounts. Jamal finished the thought, his voice dropping to a whisper. I will file the legal separation. I will shut off every single credit card with her name on it, and I will compile the federal evidence package, David added, tapping the legal pad. I will draft the IRS Form 32949A for tax fraud. I will assemble the wire fraud evidence the shell entity charts, and the creditor package. And I will cue the email to hit Richard's inbox the exact moment the ceremony begins. We stood in a triangle in the center of the office. The plan was terrifyingly precise. It was a synchronized digital assassination. "There's just one problem," Jamal said softly, looking at me. "Richard refused to walk you down the aisle. If he sits in the back row, you'll be walking alone. You'll be the one humiliated in front of your friends." I looked at the man who had just had his heart and his bank account shattered by my own sister. I looked at the man who had loved her enough to wire $300,000 to save what he thought was my reputation. "I won't be walking alone," I said, looking Jamal directly in the eyes, "because you are going to walk me down that aisle." Jamal didn't blink. A slow, incredibly dark, deeply satisfied smile spread across his face. The toxic trio wanted to use my wedding as a weapon to destroy my joy and hide their crimes. They had no idea that the wedding was about to become a trap. For the next 4 days, my family waged a silent, psychological war against me. They truly believed they were punishing me. They believed that by refusing to communicate, they were slowly breaking my resolve, forcing me to internalize the guilt of being a bridezilla. They thought I was sitting in my condo, crying over seating charts, desperate for their approval. They had no idea that while they were playing petty family games, I was managing a corporate crisis execution. The first strike came from Brittany. On Wednesday morning, she posted a long, tearful video on her Instagram story. She was sitting in her massive Jamal-funded walk-in closet, wearing no makeup, holding a tissue to her face. "I just wanted to take a moment to talk about mental health," Brittany sniffled to her 5,000 followers. "Sometimes, the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who trigger you the hardest. It's so painful when family members become obsessed with materialism and luxury, and they use their wealth to try and make you feel small. I've had to set some really hard boundaries this week to protect my peace. I won't be participating in certain toxic family events this weekend, but I'm trying to stay strong." She didn't name me explicitly, but she didn't have to. The flying monkeys of our extended family, Aunt Carol, Cousin Greg, and Uncle Carl, immediately understood the assignment. Within an hour of the post, my phone began lighting up with aggressive text messages. "Aunt Carol, I cannot believe you are doing this to your sister. A wedding is supposed to be about love, not showing off how much money you have. You should be ashamed of yourself." Cousin Greg, "Wow, making Brittany cry right before your big day? You really are as cold as Aunt Patricia says you are. Don't expect a gift from us." I didn't reply to a single one. I didn't justify myself. I didn't send them screenshots of the paid invoices. I didn't try to defend my character. In public relations, there is a golden rule. When the opposing side is digging their own grave, you do not take the shovel out of their hands. I systematically went through my contacts, blocked Aunt Carol, blocked Cousin Greg, blocked Uncle Carl, and blocked anyone else who liked Brittany's post. Then I drove to my PR firm. I walked into the lobby, approached the front desk security guard, and handed him printed photographs of Richard, Patricia, and Brittany. "These individuals are not permitted in the building under any circumstances," I instructed the guard, my voice completely professional. "If they attempt to access my floor, or if they wait for me in the parking garage, do not engage them. Call the police immediately and have them trespassed." While I was securing my physical boundaries, Jamal was securing the financial ones. Jamal could not confront Brittany yet. He had to return to their massive suburban home every night and sleep in the same bed as the woman who was actively stealing from him. It required a level of cold, terrifying discipline that only a seasoned venture capitalist could maintain. He smiled at her over breakfast. He listened to her complain about how toxic I was being. He even gave her a kiss on the forehead when he left for work. But the moment he stepped into his office, the execution began. He secretly opened entirely new, independent bank accounts at a different financial institution. Over the course of 3 days, he slowly and methodically transferred the vast majority of his liquid assets, his investment portfolios, and his retirement funds into the new secure accounts. He didn't freeze Brittany's credit cards immediately. that would have alerted her. Instead, he simply lowered the spending limits on the secondary cards attached to his name, ensuring she could still buy a coffee or lunch, but blocking any massive luxury purchases or sudden cash withdrawals. He also contacted the property management company that oversaw their home. The house was technically owned by one of Jamal's LLCs. He quietly drafted an eviction notice, giving Brittany exactly 30 days to vacate the premises once she was formally served. Meanwhile, back at our downtown condo, David had transformed his home office into a legal war room. The dining room table was covered in high-gloss, color-coded charts. One chart tracked the fake vendor invoices from Richard's import-export business. Another charted the flow of funds to the offshore shell entities. The most damning chart highlighted the exact path of Jamal's $300,000 wire transfer, directly linking it to the domestic trust that was quietly paying off Brittany's casino debts. "I finished the IRS Form 3949A, David announced on Friday night, rubbing his tired eyes as he printed a massive stack of documents. "The tax fraud report?" I asked, handing him a cup of coffee. "Yes," David nodded, tapping the thick file. "This isn't a petty complaint, Allison. This is a highly structured, heavily documented referral to the federal authorities. I have included the wire transfer receipts, the fraudulent corporate filings, and the proof of underreported income. When the IRS receives this, they won't just audit Richard. They will likely freeze his commercial operating accounts pending a full federal investigation." "And the creditors?" I asked. David smiled thinly. "I have compiled a separate package for the 3 casinos and the 2 luxury boutiques Brittany owes money to. I have documented her use of embezzled funds to cover minimum payments. When the creditors realize the money keeping her accounts afloat was obtained through wire fraud, they will accelerate her debt. They will demand full payment immediately, or they will take her to court." It was a total, inescapable financial annihilation. "What time is the ceremony on Sunday?" David asked, looking at his watch. "Guests arrive at 2:30. The processional begins at exactly 3 o'clock, I replied. David nodded. He sat down at his computer and opened an email draft addressed to Richard's personal and business email accounts. He attached the PDF files of the fraud charts, the IRS report, and the creditor package. He set a delayed delivery timer. "Send on Sunday." Exactly 3 p.m., Jamal set a synchronized timer for his own digital triggers. At exactly 3 p.m. on Sunday, the bank would execute the final account freezes. The credit cards would instantly decline, and the formal notice of legal separation would hit Brittany's inbox. The trap was fully set. All they had to do was walk into it. Sunday morning arrived with brilliant, cloudless blue skies. I sat in the massive, sunlit bridal suite of the luxury hotel, surrounded by my 4 bridesmaids. We were drinking champagne, listening to soft music, and getting our hair and makeup done. My phone buzzed on the vanity. It was a text from Patricia, a final, desperate attempt to ruin my peace before the event began. "Patricia, I hope you are happy with yourself. Your father is devastated that he won't be walking you in. Brittany has been crying all morning. We will be there, but only out of obligation. We will be wearing black. Don't expect us to smile." I looked at the text. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I felt the cold, sharp thrill of a strategist watching the opposing side walk directly into the kill zone. I typed a reply. "Allison, cannot wait to see you there." At 2:30, the guests began filtering into the grand ballroom. The space was breathtaking. Thousands of white orchids cascaded from crystal chandeliers. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Waiters passed around glasses of vintage champagne. At 2:45, the toxic trio arrived. Richard, Patricia, and Brittany walked into the bright, opulent ballroom looking like they were attending a funeral for an enemy. Richard wore a severe, ill-fitting black suit. Patricia wore a dark, heavy black dress with a high collar. Brittany wore a dramatic, sweeping black gown that was clearly designed to draw attention, paired with dark sunglasses that she stubbornly refused to take off indoors. They didn't mingle. They didn't greet the guests. As threatened, they walked straight to the very back row of the seating arrangement, as far away from the altar as physically possible. They sat down, crossed their arms, and radiated hostility. Several of my friends noticed the performance. They whispered to each other, confused by the aggressive display of mourning at a luxury wedding. Brittany leaned over to a passing guest, a distant cousin who hadn't heard the drama, and loudly whispered that I was being incredibly toxic and that they were only there to support family despite the abuse. The guest awkwardly nodded and hurried away. They thought they were winning. They thought their silent protest was humiliating me. They thought that by forcing me to walk down that massive, long aisle by myself, they would visually brand me as an isolated, unloved daughter in front of 200 people. At 2:58, the string quartet shifted their music. The slow, elegant notes of the processional began to echo through the ballroom. The guests stood up. They turned toward the massive mahogany doors at the back of the room, right next to where Richard, Patricia, and Brittany were sitting. Outside those doors, in the quiet carpeted antechamber, I stood waiting in my custom white silk gown. I looked at the clock on the wall. 2:59. The doors were supposed to open, but I had instructed the wedding coordinator to hold them closed for exactly 1 extra minute. I wanted the tension to build. I wanted Richard to sit in that back row, staring at those wooden doors, savoring the moment he believed I would walk out alone, small and broken. Footsteps echoed softly in the antechamber. I turned. Walking toward me was Jamal. He looked devastatingly sharp in a custom black tuxedo. His posture was rigid, his expression an impenetrable mask of absolute, terrifying calm. He stopped next to me. "Are the triggers locked?" I asked softly, not looking at him, keeping my eyes fixed on the heavy mahogany doors. Jamal pulled his phone from his tuxedo pocket. He checked the screen. "The primary accounts are frozen," Jamal whispered, his voice dark and smooth. "The secondary cards will decline in exactly 60 seconds. The legal separation notice is queued." "And David's package?" I asked. "Queued for 3 o'clock, Jamal confirmed, slipping the phone back into his pocket. He turned to me. He offered me his right arm. "Are you ready, Allison?" Jamal asked. I looked at the man who had been used, lied to, and stolen from by the people who were supposed to love us. I didn't see a victim. I saw a predator who had finally been let off the leash. I reached out and looped my arm firmly through his. "Let's go," I said. The clock struck 3. The wedding coordinator pulled the massive mahogany doors open. The bright amber light of the ballroom flooded the antechamber. The string quartet swelled. 200 guests turned to look at the bride, and the entire room gasped. It wasn't a gasp of awe at the dress or the flowers. It was a gasp of sheer, unadulterated shock from the people who knew my family dynamic. I was not walking alone. I was walking with the husband of the golden child. In the back row, Richard half stood from his chair, his face instantly draining of blood. The smug, hostile expression he had worn for the last 20 minutes vanished, replaced by an expression of absolute, paralyzing terror. Patricia gasped loudly, her hands flying to her mouth. She didn't understand the financial implications, but she understood optics. The optics of her golden child's incredibly wealthy husband escorting the scapegoat daughter down the aisle was a public relations nightmare that she could not spin. And Brittany froze. She stared at Jamal, her mouth slightly open. She looked from his sharp tuxedo to the way my hand rested confidently on his arm. She didn't look sad. She looked utterly panicked. Jamal and I began to walk. We walked slowly, methodically. Our steps were perfectly synchronized. We didn't look angry. We looked powerful. We looked like a corporate acquisition moving through a conquered building. As we approached the back row, we had to pass directly by Richard, Patricia, and Brittany. Richard was sweating. He tried to take a step forward, his mouth opening to say something, perhaps to demand an explanation, perhaps to desperately try and reclaim his role to avoid the humiliation. Jamal didn't stop walking. But as we passed Richard's chair, Jamal simply turned his head slightly. He looked down at the man who had stolen $300,000 from him. Jamal didn't yell. He didn't cause a scene. He simply dropped his voice to a low, lethal whisper that only the toxic trio could hear. "Check your emails," Jamal whispered. "The game is over." We kept walking. We glided past the back row, past the panicked whispers of my mother, past the sudden, frantic fumbling of Brittany, reaching into her black designer purse for her phone. We walked down the center of the ballroom, surrounded by the warm smiles of my friends and David's colleagues. They wanted me to walk alone. They wanted to brand me as an isolated failure. Instead, I walked past them with the man holding every single receipt, leaving them sitting in the back row to face the detonation of their own lies. Jamal walked me all the way to the altar. He didn't rush. He didn't look back at the back row. He kept his eyes fixed firmly on David, who was waiting for me under the floral archway, looking incredibly handsome and quietly triumphant. When we reached the end of the aisle, Jamal gently placed my hand into David's. The two men exchanged a brief, firm nod, a silent acknowledgement between two professionals who had just executed a flawless corporate takedown. Jamal then stepped back and took his seat in the front row, directly behind David, assuming the position of an honored family member. The officiant began the ceremony. I kept my eyes on David. I listened to the beautiful words being spoken about love, partnership, and trust. But behind me, sitting in the very back row of the ballroom, a silent, catastrophic digital detonation was taking place. I couldn't turn around to see it, but I knew exactly what was happening, down to the millisecond. At exactly 3 o'clock, Brittany's phone vibrated in her black designer purse. Annoyed and panicked by Jamal's sudden appearance, she would have pulled it out to check it. The first notification on her screen was an alert from her primary banking application. Access denied. Account frozen. She would have frantically logged into her secondary accounts, the ones tied to the credit cards she used to fund her luxury shopping habits. Card declined. Limit reached, and then the notification from her personal email would have dropped. The subject line was drafted by Jamal's legal team. Notice of legal separation and intent to divorce. I imagined her sitting there, her heart pounding in her chest, staring at the screen as her entire fabricated influencer lifestyle evaporated into digital smoke. She couldn't scream. She couldn't throw a tantrum. She was trapped in the back row of a silent 200-person ceremony, forced to suffer the absolute collapse of her reality without making a sound. Beside her, Richard's phone would have buzzed simultaneously. He had just watched the venture capitalist he had defrauded walk his daughter down the aisle. He was already terrified. But the email from David's law firm would have broken him. Richard would have opened the email. The attachments were clearly labeled. Exhibit Fraudulent Vendor Invoice, 2024 to 2026. Exhibit B, Offshore Shell Entity Flowchart. Exhibit C, Wire Transfer Tracing, 300,000 D. IRS Form 33949A submitted. David had not just threatened him. David had provided him with the exact dossier of evidence that was currently sitting in the inbox of a federal tax investigator. Richard would have realized in that exact moment that he was not just facing a lawsuit from Jamal. He was facing federal prison. Patricia, sitting between them in her heavy black dress, would have looked at her husband and her golden child, watching them turn pale and violently shake in their seats, completely oblivious to the financial apocalypse that had just consumed her family. At the altar, David took my hands. I promise to stand by you, not just in times of peace, but in the trenches, David said softly, reciting his vows, his eyes locking onto mine with fierce loyalty. I promise to build a fortress with you. I promise that as long as I am beside you, you will never walk alone. And I promise to choose you every single day, I replied, my voice steady and filled with absolute joy. I promise to protect our peace, to honor our boundaries, and to build a family based on respect, not obligation. The officiant pronounced us husband and wife. David leaned in and kissed me. The string quartet erupted into a joyous, upbeat symphony. The 200 guests stood up and cheered. It was a massive, roaring standing ovation. David and I turned and walked back down the aisle together. As we passed the back row, I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. I could feel the absolute devastation radiating from their seats. The guests transitioned to the cocktail hour in the adjoining garden terrace. David, Jamal, and I slipped away from the crowd and took the private elevator up to the massive bridal suite on the top floor of the hotel. I needed to change out of my heavy ceremony gown and into my sleeker reception dress, and David wanted to check his secure email server to confirm the IRS submission. We had been in the suite for exactly 10 minutes when the heavy oak door flew open. Richard, Patricia, and Brittany stormed into the room. They had bypassed hotel security. They were breathing heavily, their faces flushed with a mixture of rage, panic, and sheer desperation. The funeral black clothes they had worn to humiliate me now looked incredibly fitting. Brittany was the first to break. She threw her designer purse on the floor and lunged toward Jamal, tears streaming down her face. But they weren't the fake, manipulative tears she had used to control my parents her entire life. They were real, ugly tears of pure terror. "Jamal!" Brittany screamed, grabbing his arm. "My cards are declining. The bank says my accounts are locked. And I just got an email from a divorce lawyer. What are you doing? You can't do this to me. I'm your wife." Jamal didn't step back. He simply looked down at the hand grabbing his tuxedo sleeve, and then he looked at Brittany's face. His expression was as cold and unyielding as a glacier. "Take your hand off me, Brittany," Jamal said quietly. Brittany let go, stepping back as if she had been burned. "You stole $300,000 from me," Jamal stated, his voice completely devoid of the warmth he used to give her. "You sat on the sofa in my office, you cried, and you lied to my face. You told me your sister was going bankrupt. You told me you were terrified for her. You used my empathy to fund your gambling addiction and pay off your luxury boutique debts. I have a sickness, Jamal," Brittany cried out, instantly falling back on her victim narrative, trying to weaponize her mental health. "I have anxiety. I was stressed. I made a mistake, but we are a family. You are supposed to support me." "I am not your ATM," Jamal replied coldly, "and I am not your shield. The divorce papers will be formally served to you on Monday. The house belongs to my LLC, and the eviction notice has already been filed. You have 30 days to pack your things. You will not receive a single cent of alimony because the prenup you signed explicitly nullifies spousal support in the event of financial fraud. You have nothing." Brittany let out a sharp, hysterical wail and collapsed onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. Patricia ran over to her, wrapping her arms around the golden child. "How can you be so cruel?" Patricia yelled at Jamal. "She is a fragile girl. She made a mistake. You are destroying her life over money." "No, Patricia," I spoke up, stepping forward in my white silk dress. "She destroyed her own life by assuming there would be no consequences." Richard ignored the drama on the sofa. He walked directly toward David, his fists clenched, his face purple with rage. "You think you're smart, you little corporate suit?" Richard snarled at David. "You think you can send an email with some fake charts and scare me? I will ruin you. I will sue this law firm for defamation. I demand that you retract that email to the IRS immediately. If you don't call them right now and cancel that report, I will destroy your career." David didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply leaned against the heavy wooden dresser, crossed his arms, and looked at my father with the mild, detached amusement of a predator watching a cornered mouse. "Richard," David said smoothly, "you cannot sue me for defamation when the statements are empirically true. And I cannot retract a Form 33949A once it has been filed with the federal government. It is already in the system." David pushed away from the dresser and took a step toward my father. "You committed federal wire fraud when you accepted Jamal's $300,000 under false pretenses," David explained, listing the charges like a grocery list. "You breached your fiduciary duty to your investors by creating fake vendor invoices to siphon capital out of your operating account. You diverted those funds into offshore shell entities to evade corporate taxes. And you routed embezzled money into a domestic trust to cover your daughter's casino debts, which constitutes money laundering." Richard took a step back. The bluster was fading, replaced by the crushing reality of the legal vice David had just closed around his neck. "The IRS doesn't care about family drama, Richard," David continued quietly. "They care about the paper trail. And I provided them with a flawless, irrefutable paper trail. By tomorrow morning, your corporate accounts will be frozen pending an audit. By the end of the week, your investors will receive the same dossier I sent to you, and they will file a massive civil suit to liquidate your remaining assets. You are done." Richard stared at David, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. The illusion of his wealth, his status, and his country club superiority had been completely shattered. He was a fraud, and the smartest lawyer in the room had just handed him his execution orders. Patricia, realizing that the aggressive approach had completely failed, suddenly changed tactics. She let go of Brittany, stood up, and walked over to me. She looked at me with wide, pleading eyes. The anger was gone, replaced by the desperate, manipulative guilt-tripping she had used to control me since childhood. "Allison, please," Patricia begged, her voice trembling. "Look at what you are doing to us. Look at your sister. Look at your father. We are your family. You can't just let them go to prison. You can't let Brittany lose her home. Talk to David. Talk to Jamal. Tell them to stop this. You have to fix this. Please, Allison, for the sake of the family." I looked at the woman who had spent 33 years prioritizing my sister's comfort over my basic dignity. I looked at the woman who had demanded I cancel my wedding and hide in a backyard to protect the feelings of the very people who were robbing my brother-in-law blind. I didn't feel a shred of guilt. The emotional chains she had wrapped around me were gone. "Mum," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "When I asked you to support me, you called me a bridezilla. When I asked you to celebrate my wedding, you told me I was cold and selfish." I took a step closer to her, looking her directly in the eyes. "So I am going to give you the exact same advice you gave me 5 days ago," I said softly, throwing her own toxic words right back in her face. "Go solo, stop making drama, and protect your mental health." Patricia gasped, stumbling back as if I had struck her. "I am not your crisis manager," I stated firmly. "I am not your scapegoat, and I will not protect you from the consequences of your own actions. Now, get out of my bridal suite before I have hotel security escort you out in front of my guests." They didn't argue. They had absolutely no leverage left. Richard turned, his shoulders slumped in defeat, and walked out of the room. Patricia grabbed Brittany's arm, hoisted her up from the sofa, and dragged her out the door. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind them. The room was silent. I looked at David. I looked at Jamal. We didn't say anything. We just exhaled. The toxic tumor had been completely excised from my life. I walked into the adjoining dressing room, slipped out of my heavy wedding gown, and put on my sleek, white silk reception dress. I reapplied my lipstick, checked my hair, and walked back out. "Are you ready?" David asked, offering me his arm. "I've never been more ready in my life," I smiled. We went downstairs. The reception was breathtaking. We danced, we drank champagne, and we celebrated with the people who actually loved us, respected us, and wanted to see us thrive. The fallout over the next 6 months was absolute, comprehensive, and devastatingly public. The Monday after the wedding, at precisely 8 in the morning, federal investigators arrived at Richard's import-export business in unmarked black SUVs. They did not knock politely. They executed a federal search warrant, seizing the physical servers, boxing up thousands of pages of physical files, and officially freezing all commercial operating accounts pending a massive criminal audit. When the investors, including Jamal, were formally notified of the investigation and provided with David's dossier, the reaction in the financial community was explosive. Jamal's legal team immediately filed an aggressive injunction. Richard's remaining domestic assets, including his luxury cars and personal bank accounts, were seized to cover the massive shortfall. 3 months later, the criminal hammer finally dropped. Richard was indicted on multiple federal charges, including wire fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering. He was placed under house arrest, forced to wear an incredibly heavy, humiliating GPS ankle monitor, and ordered to surrender his passport. His trial date was set for the following spring, and his defense attorneys privately warned him that he was facing a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years in a federal penitentiary. With Richard's accounts frozen and his business forcibly liquidated, Patricia's country club lifestyle evaporated overnight. She tried to maintain appearances at first. For 2 weeks, she continued showing up to her weekly ladies' luncheons and charity committee meetings, acting as if the federal raid was just a minor misunderstanding with the IRS. But the social excommunication in our wealthy community was swift, silent, and absolutely merciless. Her friends quietly stopped returning her calls. The country club board of directors sent a polite but firm letter suggesting she resign her membership immediately to avoid uncomfortable public scrutiny. Unable to pay the mortgage, the massive suburban house she had prized her entire life was foreclosed on by the bank. She and Richard were unceremoniously evicted and forced to move into a tiny, two-bedroom rental apartment on the industrial outskirts of the city. Brittany's collapse was even more pathetic. True to his word, Jamal did not give her a single cent in the divorce settlement. The ironclad prenuptial agreement, combined with the documented evidence of financial fraud and embezzlement, left her with absolutely zero legal or financial leverage. She was evicted from Jamal's luxury home exactly 30 days after the wedding. Without Jamal's platinum credit cards to fund her designer wardrobe, and without Richard's embezzled trust fund to cover her casino debts, Brittany's entire social media influencer career died a sudden, quiet death. She couldn't afford to fake the luxury aesthetic anymore, and she knew that if she posted a single photo, the comments would be flooded with questions about the federal indictment. She deactivated her Instagram account entirely. The last I heard through the community grapevine, Brittany was working a minimum wage retail job at a local mall, living in Patricia and Richard's cramped spare bedroom, and drowning in aggressive daily collection calls from the creditors David had alerted. They had built their entire lives on lies, manipulation, and the exploitation of the people around them. And when the structural integrity of those lies was tested by someone who refused to play their game, the entire house of cards collapsed. As for me, my life moved forward with an incredible, profound sense of peace. David and I bought a beautiful house in the suburbs. My PR firm thrived, and I received a major promotion to Vice President of Crisis Communications. But the most unexpected and perhaps the most beautiful outcome of the entire ordeal was my relationship with Jamal. Jamal didn't just walk away after the divorce. The shared trauma of navigating my family's betrayal forged an unbreakable bond between us. He became a permanent fixture in our lives. He came over for Sunday dinners. We spent Thanksgiving and Christmas together. When David and I started talking about having children, Jamal immediately insisted that he was going to be the cool, incredibly wealthy uncle who spoiled them rotten. We had built a chosen family. I learned a very hard, very necessary lesson about the nature of love and loyalty. Blood is merely a biological accident. It gives people the proximity to demand your time, but it does not automatically grant them the right to your respect. Real family is not defined by shared DNA. Real family is defined by the people who stand beside you when the room gets dark. Real family is defined by the people who refuse to let you walk alone. My parents had tried to use my wedding as a weapon. They had tried to isolate me. They had tried to shrink my life so their crimes could stay large. They wanted me to walk alone. Instead, I walked into my future, surrounded by the men who actually loved and respected me, and I left my toxic family sitting in the absolute wreckage of their own lies. So tell me honestly, if your own family tried to sabotage your wedding, humiliate you in front of everyone you loved, and use your name to hide a massive financial lie, would you cancel your happiness to keep the peace? Or would you walk down that aisle with the person who actually stood beside you and let the truth completely destroy the people who tried to bury it? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one.